The insurance papers had no business being in that drawer. I was simply searching for my grandmother's cornbread recipe, the one Roger never stopped praising over the course of our 42-year marriage. Instead, my hand brushed against a thick, manila envelope hidden beneath a stack of old tax forms and birthday cards long past relevance. I might have missed it altogether if it weren't for the date stamped on the front, March 17th of this year, just 3 weeks ago. My name is Elena Derrick, and at 64, I've stopped believing in accidents. After 4 decades of teaching high school English, I've developed a sharp eye for details and a keen sense for when stories don't quite add up. And this, an unfamiliar envelope tucked away in a drawer Roger knew I rarely opened, felt like the first line of a story I hadn't been told. I pulled the papers out carefully, smoothing them on the surface of our polished oak kitchen table. The same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, raised our 2 kids, and grown older, side by side. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the bay windows, casting a warm glow across the page. At the top, bold letters, life insurance policy. My heart skipped. It's not unusual to have life insurance. Roger and I had modest policies taken out, decades ago when the kids were still little. But this policy was new. And it wasn't for Roger, it was for me. $2 million. $2 million that didn't exist when we sat with our financial advisor just last month for our annual check-in. $2 million Roger never mentioned. I scanned the details. The policy had been opened on March 10th, the first premium payment processed on March 15th. I frowned, something tickling at the edge of my memory. I picked up my phone and checked my calendar. There it was. March 8th. Through 14th, I had been in Portland, visiting our daughter Sarah and helping with baby Emma, born 2 weeks early. Sarah's husband was out of town on business, and Roger had claimed his arthritis was too painful for travel. I'd been gone for exactly 1 week. He had taken out the policy while I was across the country. The kettle let out a sharp whistle, making me jump. I folded the documents with unsteady hands and slipped them back exactly where I found them. As I fixed myself a cup of tea, I tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a kind gesture, extra coverage as we aged, a surprise he intended to share. But why the secrecy? Why hide it? Why not bring it up during our usual Sunday talks about money, and why so much? Our house had been paid off for years. Our children were financially independent. We lived comfortably on our pensions and investments, but we were far from rich. $2 million was a staggering number. As I took a sip of my Earl Grey, a strange unease settled over me. Grey. A fragment of memory floated to the surface, a conversation from just a few weeks back, right after I'd gotten home from book club. "You seem distracted," I had said at the time, noticing how Roger barely glanced up from his laptop as I walked in. "Oh, just looking something up," he replied, quickly snapping the lid shut. "Nothing important. How was the book?" Back then, I hadn't thought much of it. After 42 years together, we'd developed an understanding. We gave each other space when needed. But now, the moment gnawed at me. What exactly had he been researching with such focus? I was still turning it over in my mind when the garage door rumbled open. Roger was back from his golf outing, earlier than usual. I took a steadying breath and made a conscious decision. I would watch and listen. If I was overthinking, fine. But if something truly was off, I'd need more than just an unexplained life insurance policy before I acted. "Elena?" Roger called from the front hallway, the familiar sound of his golf bag thumping against the wall following his voice. "In the kitchen," I replied, smoothing my expression into something neutral. He appeared in the doorway, still tall, still handsome in that seasoned way, with silver hair and those same blue eyes I'd fallen for all those years ago at university. He smiled. That warm, familiar smile. But instead of comfort, it made my skin crawl. "You're home earlier than I expected," I said casually. "Game ended early." "Ted wasn't feeling great," he replied, walking over to grab a bottle of water from the fridge. "What have you been up to?" The lie came easily. "Just sorting through old recipes. Thought I'd make your favorite cornbread for dinner." His face lit up. "That sounds amazing. You know how much I love your cornbread." I watched him closely, searching for anything. A flicker in his eyes, a hesitation, anything that might hint at a hidden agenda. But there was nothing, just the same expression I'd trusted for decades, the same face I thought I knew better than anyone. That night, as Roger slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spinning. Maybe I was imagining things. People took out life insurance policies all the time. But something about the timing, the secrecy, the amount, it all unsettled me deeply. I needed answers, and I knew exactly when to start looking. Tomorrow, while Roger was out for his regular physical therapy appointment, I'd begin digging in earnest. I had no way of knowing then how much what I would find would shatter everything I believed about my life, my marriage, and the man I'd shared a home and a bed with for more than 40 years. The next morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of early spring day New England is known for. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting shifting shadows on the bedroom walls. Roger was already up. I could hear the sounds from the kitchen, the soft gurgle of the coffee, machine and the radio murmuring in the background. I stayed in bed a little longer, mentally preparing. Today was Thursday, his weekly session with Dr. Weiss for shoulder therapy. That meant 2 full hours where I could search the house undisturbed. When I finally made my way downstairs, Roger was sitting at the kitchen island, a newspaper spread out in front of him and a steaming mug of coffee nearby. He looked up and smiled, far too casually for someone who might be plotting something dark. "Morning, sunshine. Coffee's fresh," he said warmly. I smiled back, keeping everything about our routine intact. "Thanks. Got anything planned?" "Today, besides therapy? Might swing by the hardware store afterward. That railing on the back deck's been loose for a while. Thinking I'll fix it this weekend," he replied between sips. "You've got your book club committee meeting at noon, right?" he added. "Yep," I said easily, though it wasn't. True. Book club wasn't until next week. Another harmless lie. Roger nodded and went back to his paper. I poured myself a cup of coffee, my heart quiet but alert. The everyday feel of the morning nearly convinced me to doubt what I had uncovered just the day before. Almost. Once Roger left for his physical therapy appointment, I waited a cautious 15 minutes to be sure he wouldn't return unexpectedly to grab something he'd forgotten. Then I began my search in earnest. I started with his office, the small room he had converted into a den, where he kept his personal computer and important documents. His laptop, unsurprisingly, was locked with a password. After over 40 years of marriage, I'd assumed there were no secrets between us. I typed in the usual, Elena Day 1979, the date we met. Nothing. I tried our anniversary, his birthday, the kids' birth dates. Still nothing. That alone said a lot. Roger had changed his password, and intentionally chosen something I wouldn't guess. I moved on to his desk drawers, methodically opening and examining each one. Most contained exactly what you'd expect: office supplies, outdated user manuals, and old birthday cards. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a pile of appliance warranties for things we no longer owned, I found another envelope. Inside were bank statements, for an account I had never seen before, at a bank we didn't even use. According to the paperwork, the account was opened in January, just 3 months earlier, with an initial deposit of $50,000. My stomach turned cold. The deposit had come directly from our joint investment portfolio. I remembered Roger telling me he'd moved the money into our savings account to cover the kitchen renovation we'd been discussing. But it had never shown up there. Instead, it had landed in this secret account, which now had just under $47,000. Where had the remaining $3,000 gone? My search continued until I came across a third envelope, this one filled with receipts. One was for a meeting with an attorney I didn't know. Another was from a private investigation firm, Blackwell Investigations, their name printed in subtle gray ink. The rest were from an upscale jewelry store in Boston. The total? A little over $3,000. Roger hadn't given me jewelry in years. The picture was becoming painfully clear. In the last 90 days, Roger had withdrawn a large sum of money from our shared assets, opened a hidden bank account, consulted a lawyer, hired a private investigator, bought expensive jewelry for someone else, and taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on me. The conclusion was devastating, but inescapable. Roger, my husband of 42 years, was having an affair, and possibly preparing to permanently erase me from the equation. I sat back in his office chair, the documents spread across the desk before me. To my surprise, I felt eerily calm. The emotional collapse would come later, I had no doubt. But right now, the pragmatic, analytical part of me, the seasoned teacher, had taken control. I needed more than suspicion. I needed solid proof. And, more importantly, I needed to protect myself. I carefully returned each envelope to its original hiding place, ensuring no sign of disturbance. Then I made 3 phone calls. The first was to our family attorney, not the one Roger had seen. The second was to our financial advisor, and the third was to Margaret, my oldest and dearest friend, who had been at my side since our college days. By the time Roger came home from his appointment, I had composed myself and crafted the beginnings of a plan. I would keep watching, waiting, and collecting evidence. I'd secure my finances, consult legal support, and find out exactly who, or what, had led my husband to take such drastic steps after decades of what I thought was a good marriage. "How was therapy?" I asked as he stepped into the kitchen. My voice was steady, almost effortless. "The usual, hurts like hell, but it's helping," he replied, rolling his shoulder for emphasis. "Weiss says maybe another month and I'll be back to normal." I nodded with a sympathetic smile, silently wondering if anything would ever feel normal again. "That's good. I made lunch if you're hungry." We ate our sandwiches in what looked like peaceful silence, but beneath it, tension simmered. A silence now brimming with secrets, suspicions, and betrayals. I studied the man sitting across from me, and for the first time in decades, I wasn't sure who he truly was. I looked at him, the familiar lines of his face, the hands that had held mine through the births of our 2 children, a terrifying cancer scare, and the loss of both my parents. The same lips that had whispered, "I love you," to me every single night for decades. But now I couldn't help but wonder, who was this man really? And what was he capable of? The truth, whatever it was, might shatter the life we had, built over 42 years. But I needed to uncover it. No matter the cost, I had to know. For the next 2 weeks, I turned into an investigator under my own roof. I tracked Roger's routines, watched how he used his phone, and monitored his moods. I jotted down his unexplained absences and paid close attention to the hushed phone calls I overheard from behind closed doors. I scrutinized our bank activity with relentless focus, checking our accounts daily for anything unusual. Roger, for his part, seemed oblivious. If he noticed my behavior, he didn't let on. Life continued, on the surface, exactly as it always had. We ate meals together, watched our regular shows, and chatted about our children and grandchildren. He kissed me goodbye in the mornings and greeted me with a smile at night. We even made love twice. Each time left me feeling more confused and empty. How could someone fake such closeness? Or worse, had I created this narrative myself, interpreting routine financial decisions and an insurance policy through the lens of paranoia? But then came the so-called business trip, a 3-day conference in Chicago that Roger mentioned over dinner one evening. "The American Engineers Association is hosting a panel on structural innovations," he said casually. "Thought I'd go, catch up with some old colleagues." Roger had been retired from his engineering career for 4 years, but he did maintain professional ties. Still, the timing was suspicious. He'd rarely attended conferences without me over our entire marriage, 5 maybe in total. "When is it?" I asked. "Next week, Tuesday through Thursday." What he didn't seem to recall was that my annual checkup with Dr. Bennett was scheduled for that Wednesday, an appointment he'd added to our shared calendar months ago. That night, after he'd fallen asleep, I quietly got out of bed and padded to the kitchen where he'd left his laptop. To my shock, it wasn't locked. Whether by accident or intention, I didn't know, but he'd left it accessible. I opened his browser and started to scroll through the history. Sure enough, there were searches for hotels and flights to Chicago. That seemed to confirm his story at first, but as I kept scrolling, my heart seized. Search terms appeared that made my blood run cold. Undetectable poisons, natural toxins that mimic heart failure. How long do police take to investigate sudden deaths? This was no longer a paranoid fantasy. This was real. I quickly snapped photos of the screen with my phone, making sure to return the browser to exactly where I'd found it. Then I slipped back into bed beside him, staring at the ceiling in silent horror as I listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing. The man I had loved for most of my life was researching how to kill me. The following morning, I picked up the phone and called Margaret. "I need you to stay with me next week," I said without any pleasantries. "Elena? What's going on?" she asked, concern immediately filling her voice. "Roger's going to a conference. I don't want to be alone." I couldn't bring myself to explain everything. Not yet. I needed more certainty before saying it out loud. To her credit, Margaret didn't press me. "Of course. I'll be there Tuesday through Thursday." He leaves Tuesday morning. I'll pack a bag. Sounds like a girl's retreat to me. I could have wept with relief. Margaret had been married to a police detective for over 30 years. She would know how to handle this, and I trusted her more than anyone. Tuesday came. Roger left early, suitcase in hand, kissing me softly at the door. "I'll call you when I land," he said. I watched from the front window as his car pulled away, then immediately called Margaret. "He's gone." "Can you come now?" She arrived within half an hour, an overnight bag slung over her shoulder, and to my surprise, a box of files in her other hand. "Show me everything," she said without hesitation the moment she walked in. I laid it all out. The life insurance policy, the unfamiliar bank statements, the jewelry store receipts, and the screenshots of Roger's search history. Margaret examined each item carefully, her expression hardening with every new discovery. Margaret's face grew more serious with every passing moment. "You need to go to the police," she said at last. I shook my head. "With what? A few questionable Google searches and a life insurance policy? All of it could be explained away. They'd never take me seriously. They might even laugh." "Then we need more proof," Margaret replied firmly. "And in the meantime, you need to stay safe. I'm not leaving you alone until we get to the bottom of this." That evening, as promised, Roger called. His voice was as calm and pleasant as ever, playing through the speakerphone while Margaret and I sat listening. "The hotel's amazing," he said enthusiastically. "It's right on the river. The view is unbelievable. You'd absolutely love it, Elena. We should come back here together sometime." "That sounds lovely," I replied, my voice steady. Margaret gave me a look, her expression tightening with concern. "How was your day?" he asked. "Quiet," I said. "Caught up on some reading." I didn't mention Margaret was with me. "And the conference?" I prompted. "Really interesting," he said. "I ran into Bill Harris. Remember him from the Philadelphia project? He's doing some impressive stuff with sustainable materials now." We chatted for a few more minutes. Everything he said sounded perfectly normal. When the call ended, Margaret exhaled deeply. "He's good. Really good. Or maybe he's telling the truth," I said, though not with much conviction. "Let's see," she replied, pulling out her phone. She dialed quickly. "Harold, it's me," she said. "Need a favor. Can you get in touch with your friend Steve over at the Chicago PD? Ask him to swing by the Riverside Grand Hotel and confirm if a Roger Derrick checked in today." About an hour later, her phone rang again. She picked up, listened in silence, then ended the call, her face grim. "No one by that name checked into the Riverside Grand today, and there's no engineering conference scheduled there this week." My world tilted. "Then where is he?" I whispered. "That's what we need to find out," Margaret said. "But first, we make sure you're safe when he gets back." The next morning was my annual doctor's appointment, the very one Roger had scheduled his trip around. Dr. Bennett found nothing concerning. "Everything looks great, Elena," she said cheerfully. "You're in excellent shape for 64. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. Your labs look fantastic, heart's strong, blood pressure's perfect. You'll outlive all of us." On the drive home, a thought struck me like a bolt of lightning. "The coffee," I said suddenly. "What coffee?" Margaret asked, glancing over. Every morning this past month, Rogers insisted on making my coffee. Claims he finally perfected the ratio. Beans to water. My grip tightened on the dashboard. What if he's been testing something? Something that wouldn't show up on routine blood work? Margaret's hands stiffened around the steering wheel. When does he get back? Tomorrow afternoon? Then we'll be ready. That night, we mapped out our plan. Margaret would make a show of leaving in the morning, visible, deliberate, but would return shortly after through the back entrance and hide inside the house. I would greet Roger as usual, accept his offer of coffee, but I wouldn't drink a drop. Morning arrived with a text from Roger. Coming home early. Flight lands at 11 Mayo. Can't wait to see you. Margaret and I exchanged looks. Change of plans, she said. I'm hiding now. By the time Roger's key turned in the front door just after noon, Margaret was tucked away in the unused formal dining room with a clear line of sight into the kitchen. I sat at the kitchen island, a novel open in front of me, trying to appear as calm and unsuspecting as possible. Elena, Roger called cheerfully, setting his travel bag down near the entry. In the kitchen, I answered, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it echoing in the walls. He appeared in the doorway, flashing that familiar smile. The one I used to love, but now it felt like a mask worn by a stranger. Miss me? Absolutely. I stood up to hug him, battling the urge to pull away. How's the rest of the conference going? Enlightening. He kissed my cheek. Let me freshen up, and then I'll fill you in over coffee. While Roger took a shower, I sent a quick message to Margaret. It's happening. Get ready. About 20 minutes later, Roger appeared in the kitchen looking renewed, dressed in fresh clothes with his hair still damp. Sit down, he urged. Let me take care of you for once. You're always the one looking after everyone else. I complied, settling back at the kitchen island as he carefully prepared coffee in our French press. His movements were deliberate and exact, as always. Roger. Derek was nothing if not precise. I've been thinking, he said casually as he worked. Maybe we should take a trip. The Amalfi Coast? You've always wanted to see Italy. That sounds wonderful. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. He poured 2 cups of coffee, adding just the right amount of cream to mine. Perfect, as usual. But when he placed the cup, in front of me I caught something strange, a faint metallic scent beneath the rich aroma of the coffee. So subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't been on edge, noticing every little detail. Drink up while it's still hot, Roger encouraged, taking a sip from his own cup. I lifted mine to my lips, pretending to drink but not letting any liquid touch my mouth. Perfect, I murmured. Roger studied me closely, an unfamiliar look in his eyes, something between anticipation and worry. You okay? You seem tense? Just tired. Didn't sleep well without you. I set the cup down, sliding it slightly away from me. Tell me about Chicago. How was the conference? Fascinating. He launched into a detailed description of panels and speakers, all lies, which I now recognized as he spoke. I noticed him glancing repeatedly at my coffee cup, noting how little I had actually drunk. You're not drinking your coffee? He asked during a pause in his fabricated story. It's still a bit hot. I'll get to it. I forced a smile, feeling it stretch unnaturally across my face. Suddenly, Roger reached across the island and took my hand in his. Elena, are you sure you're all right? You look pale. The concern in his voice sounded genuine, which only made the situation feel more surreal. This was the man I'd shared my life with for over 40 years, sitting across from me, holding my hand, while the poisoned coffee cooled between us. Actually, I said slowly, I do feel a little strange. Roger's expression shifted. Subtly, relief maybe. Maybe you should lie down. I can help you upstairs. No, I said quickly. I think I'll just sit here for a moment. He frowned and glanced at his watch discreetly. At least finish your coffee? The caffeine might help. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken tension. I knew I had to choose, confrontation or keep up the pretense. In the end, instinct won out. Actually, I said, I think you should drink it. Roger blinked, confused. What? My coffee? Yes, drink it. His expression darkened. Don't be absurd. I have my own. Then let's switch. I'm suddenly in the mood for black. I pushed my cup toward him and reached for his. Roger's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising force. Elena, what's going on? The facade was crumbling. I looked into the eyes of the man I'd loved most of my life and saw a stranger staring back. I think, I said carefully, you should explain what's in my coffee. Roger's grip tightened painfully. You're not making any sense. Maybe you're having some kind of episode. Should I call Dr. Bennett? I saw her yesterday. She says I'm perfectly healthy. I held his gaze firmly. Unlike you, I actually went where I said I would. Roger's face went blank, then reshaped into a mask of confused concern. Elena, you're not well. Let me help you to bed and we can sort this out. No. I wrenched my wrist free, struggling. What I need is for you to explain the insurance policy, the secret bank account, the jewelry receipts, and the poison you just tried to give me. The transformation was sudden and terrifying. The mask dropped entirely, revealing an expression I'd never seen on my husband in 42 years of marriage. Cold, calculating, devoid of the love I'd believed in for so long. How long have you known? He asked flatly. Long enough. I edged backward, suddenly afraid in a way I never had been in my own home. Roger's gaze flicked to my untouched coffee, then back to my face. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Margaret. My voice was steady, despite the fear surging through me. From the dining room doorway, Margaret appeared, phone raised, recording everything. It's all on video, Roger. The coffee, the conversation, everything. Roger's face twisted with rage. He lunged across the island, knocking cups flying, his hands reaching for my throat. But Margaret was faster. The heavy wooden cutting board connected with the back of his head, sending him crashing to the floor. I stumbled backward, gasping, as Margaret moved quickly to my side. Are you okay? I nodded, unable to speak, staring at my husband's unconscious form on the kitchen floor, the very floor where we'd danced on our 40th anniversary, where our grandchildren had taken their first steps. I've already called 911, Margaret said, her arm around my shoulders. They're on their way. I sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. He really was trying to kill me. Margaret nodded grimly. And from the look on his face when you confronted him, he would have succeeded, eventually, and he gestured at the spilled coffee. We'll need to preserve that as evidence. As the wailing sirens drew nearer, I looked around the kitchen that had been the heart of our family home for decades. The photos on the fridge, the silly magnets from vacations, the grandchildren's handprint art, all that shared history, built on what now seemed like a foundation of lies. Or was it only a lie recently? Had Roger truly loved me once, before something or someone became more important than 42 years of marriage? I didn't know. But as police officers entered our home and paramedics tended to the unconscious stranger on my kitchen floor, I realized I had time to find out. Thanks to a suspicious insurance policy, a metallic smell in my coffee, and the kind of intuition that comes from a lifetime of noticing every detail, I would uncover the truth, no matter what it was. The police station smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. I sat in an interview room with an untouched paper cup of water in front of me. Margaret stood nearby, a reassuring presence. Detective Haraman, a compact woman with sharp eyes and prematurely gray hair, was reviewing my statement for the third time. Let me make sure I understand, she said, looking up briefly from her notes. You discovered a life insurance policy taken out on you without your knowledge. You found evidence of unexplained financial transactions. You confirmed your husband wasn't where he claimed to be, and upon his return, you believe he tried to poison you. Yes, I replied quietly. My voice sounded strange even to me. Thin, distant, as if it belonged to someone else. And you have documentation for the financial transactions and the insurance policy? My attorney has copies of everything. I gave her all the evidence as I uncovered it. Detective Haraman nodded, jotting down another note. Smart. Regarding the coffee, The officers collected samples from both cups and the French press. Margaret interrupted. I made sure they followed protocol and preserved everything. Haraman's lip twitched, almost a smile. Former law enforcement wife of 30 years. There's a look of understanding between us. Well, Mrs. Derrick, we've sent the coffee samples to the lab for analysis. Your husband is currently receiving medical treatment, but once he's cleared, he will be brought in for questioning. I asked, that depends on what you find in the coffee and what he says? She closed her notebook. For now, I advise you not to return home. Is there somewhere you can stay? He's coming with me, Margaret said firmly. My husband's a retired detective. She'll be safe. With us. Haraman seemed satisfied with this plan. We'll be in touch as soon as we have more information. And if you remember anything else that might be relevant, call me directly. She slid a business card across the table. As we left the station, the reality began to sink in. My husband of 42 years was in custody, suspected of trying to kill me. I was effectively homeless, my own home shattered by betrayal. And I still had no idea why. What happens now? I asked Margaret as we drove through the growing shadows of early evening. Now, she said, eyes on the road, we find out why your husband tried to kill you. Margaret and Harold's guest room became my refuge for the next few days. Harold, a big man with kind eyes and the skepticism of a seasoned detective, took it upon himself to collect essential belongings from my home while the police processed the scene. The place is swarming with technicians, he reported when he returned. They're being thorough. That's good. Bagging everything, testing surfaces. If Roger left any trace from earlier attempts, they'll find it. The idea that there might have been previous attempts, that the perfect coffee Roger had made for me every morning might have contained slowly increasing doses of poison, made me physically sick. On the third day after Roger's arrest, Detective Haraman called with an update. The lab confirmed thallium in your coffee cup, she said. It's a tasteless, odorless poison. In small doses, it causes symptoms that mimic many illnesses. In larger amounts, it can be deadly. It's sometimes called the poisoner's poison, Haraman explained, because it's so difficult to detect without specific tests. But in this case, your husband used too much. That's why you noticed the metallic smell. Is that why he scheduled his business trip around my doctor's appointment? I asked, the pieces falling into place. To make sure you wouldn't have blood work done that could detect it. Possibly. We're still investigating. Haraman paused before adding, there's something else. We found evidence that your husband has been involved with another woman. Despite everything, the poisoned coffee, the attempted murder, and after 42 years of marriage, ending in the most horrifying betrayal imaginable. Those words still cut me deeply. I managed to identify a woman named Christine Lauder, Margaret said quietly. According to our investigation, they've been involved for about 6 months. The name meant nothing to me. Is she young? I asked, hating how exposed and vulnerable I suddenly felt. No, Mrs. Derrick, Margaret replied. She's 61, a widow. Apparently, she believes your husband is also widowed. I sank heavily onto Margaret's guest bed, the phone slipping into my suddenly numb hand. He told her you were dead. It appears so. We're interviewing her today. She might not have known your husband's true situation or intentions. After the call ended, I remained frozen, trying to absorb this new truth. Roger hadn't just betrayed me with another woman. He had erased me completely, inventing a reality in which I no longer existed. Perhaps in his mind, that made it easier to imagine turning that fiction into truth. An hour later, Margaret found me still sitting there, staring blankly at the wall. Elena. What did Haraman say? I recounted the information mechanically, each word tasting like broken glass in my mouth. When I finished, Margaret sat beside me and took my hand in hers. I'm so sorry. 42 years? I whispered. Was any of it real? Margaret squeezed my hand gently. I don't know, but we're going to find out. The next day, Detective Haraman called again, this time asking me to come to the station. We've interviewed Miss Lauder and your husband. I think you should hear what we've learned. Harold drove us, his protective instincts sharpened by his own law enforcement background. You don't have to do this today, he said as we parked. It can wait until you're ready. But I was ready. The initial shock had been replaced by a cold, clear determination to understand what had happened to my marriage and why my husband of over 40 years had decided my death was preferable to a divorce. Detective Haraman met us in the lobby, her expression serious. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Derrick. This way, please. Instead of the usual interview room, she led us to a conference room. A laptop was open on the table alongside a folder of documents. Before I show you these materials, I want to prepare you. Some of this will be difficult to hear. Based on our interviews with your husband and Miss Lauder, as well as evidence recovered from your home and other places, we've pieced together a timeline of events that led to the attempt on your life. I nodded, bracing myself. Haraman opened the folder. According to our investigation, your husband began his relationship with Christine Lauder about 7 months ago, after meeting her at a fundraising event for the hospital where his sister was treated for cancer. Miss Lauder serves on the hospital board. She slid a photograph across the table. A silver-haired woman with an elegant presence and impeccably tailored clothes. Attractive, certainly, but not young. Not a trophy girlfriend. And she, equal. From the beginning, he presented himself as a widower. According to Miss Lauder, he told her his wife had died of cancer 3 years earlier. I stared at the photo, trying to grasp the depth of deceit needed to maintain such a lie. But we socialize regularly. We have friends, family. How could he think no one would mention me? He was careful to keep Miss Lauder separate from his existing social circles. Their relationship was mostly conducted in Boston, where she has an apartment. Your husband would visit her there, claiming to attend engineering conferences or consulting jobs. Those unexplained absences over recent months suddenly made sense. The late nights, weekend golf tournaments that never yielded trophies or stories. Meanwhile, our regular life went on. Dinners with friends, visits from our children and grandchildren, the routines of a long-established marriage. As the relationship progressed, Haraman continued, Miss Lauder started pressing for something more permanent. She wanted him to move in, to stop living in what she saw as a shrine to his deceased wife. According to her, Roger grew increasingly distressed about this because his deceased wife was still very much alive and living in that house. I said, the bitter irony nearly overwhelming me. That's exactly it, Haraman replied. About 3 months ago, we believe he began contemplating a permanent solution to his problem. Her clinical phrasing, a permanent solution, instead of murdering his wife, made it somehow even more chilling. The financial transactions you uncovered were indeed linked to this plan, Haraman continued, spreading several documents across the table. The $50,000 withdrawn from your joint investment account was split. Some went into the account you discovered, which seems to have been intended as a financial safety net for the transition period after your death. The jewelry purchases were gifts from Miss Lauder. Each new detail felt like another hit, but I kept my composure. Years of managing a classroom had prepared me well for emotional strain. And the life insurance policy? I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. That's where it gets interesting, Haraman said, her expression shifting slightly. The policy was indeed taken out without your knowledge or consent, which is fraudulent. However, there's a detail you might have overlooked. She slid another paper across the table, a copy of the insurance policy. I noticed a section I hadn't focused on before. The policy started on March 10th, but the waiting period clause states that death benefits won't be paid if death occurs less than 30 days after the policy date. Your husband's poisoning attempt happened on April 8th. I stared at the document as realization slowly dawned. 1 week too soon. Exactly. If he had succeeded in killing you, the insurance company wouldn't have paid out. The policy would have been worthless. Looked up, confused. But why take out a policy and then act before it would pay? That was our initial confusion as well, Haraman admitted. It doesn't add up, unless the insurance wasn't his main motivation. What do you mean? Based on our interviews and the evidence, we believe your husband was under increasing pressure from Miss Lauder to make their relationship public and move in with her permanently. The fact that you were still alive was an impossible barrier to that. So, he decided to remove the barrier, I said flatly. Yes, but he also wanted financial security. The insurance was supposed to provide that. Unfortunately for him, he miscalculated the timing. According to his own statement, he thought the waiting period was 15 days, not 30. I almost laughed at the absurdity. My husband of 42 years had tried to kill me for another woman and hadn't even bothered to read the fine print on the insurance that was supposed to fund his new life. What happens now? I asked. Your husband has been charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, and several other related crimes. Given the evidence, his lawyer will probably advise him to take a plea deal, but negotiations are ongoing. And Miss Lauder? At this point, we have no proof she knew about his plans or his real marital status. She seems as much a victim of his deception as you are, just in a different way. I nodded, trying to take it all in. Is there anything else I should know? Haraman hesitated. There is one more thing. During our search of your home, we found a journal in your husband's golf bag. It has detailed entries about his relationship with Miss Lauder, his growing resentment towards you, and eventually, his plans to get rid of you. She slid a plastic evidence bag across the table. Inside was a small leather-bound notebook I'd never seen before. This is a copy, she explained. The original is in evidence, but we thought you should see it. It might help you. I wasn't sure if understanding was even possible in a situation like this. I stared at the journal, hesitant to delve into the private thoughts of a man who had shared my bed, my home, and my life for over 40 years, only to decide that ending my life was easier than facing the social and financial complications of a divorce. Thank you, I said quietly, finally accepting the bagged journal. I'll think about it. As I stood, Haraman gave me a probing look. Mrs. Derrick, I've been in this line of work for 20 years and have seen every kind of betrayal imaginable. But what your husband did, the cold calculation, the months of deceit while living as your horror spouse, it's extraordinary. She paused, her tone softening. I want you to know this isn't your fault. Some people simply hide their true selves remarkably well. Her words were meant to comfort me, but they only deepened the crushing reality I faced. The man I loved and trusted for decades had never truly been who I thought he was. Margaret and Harold's guest room became my sanctuary. Spring blossomed. Outside the window, but inside, I spent my days mostly withdrawn, coming out only for meals as I tried to process the destruction of my marriage and the near loss of my life. The journal sat unopened on the nightstand. I wasn't ready to read. Roger's words, to view our marriage through the twisted lens of his growing hatred. Not yet. Instead, I focused on practical matters. My attorney helped me obtain court orders freezing our joint assets and blocking Roger from any financial moves while awaiting trial. I also had the heartbreaking task of telling our children. The conversation was devastating, explaining that their father was accused of trying to kill me. Their shock and sorrow mirrored my own, binding us in a shared trauma that would take years to heal. I just can't believe it, Sarah said, her voice trembling on the phone. Dad, our dad, tried to... I can't even say it. I know, I soothed, my maternal instincts overpowering my own grief. I can hardly believe it myself. But why? After all these years, why didn't he just ask for a divorce? It was the question everyone asked, the one I kept asking myself. Why choose murder over divorce? The financial toll would have been similar. The emotional pain for our family would have been huge but survivable. What could possibly make death seem like the better option? 2 weeks after Roger's arrest, I finally opened the journal. The first entry was dated 6 months prior, around the time he met Christine Lauder at the hospital fundraiser. His handwriting, so familiar from birthday cards and grocery lists, now filled the pages with a story I barely recognized. Met an extraordinary woman tonight. Christine Lauder, elegant, intelligent, financially independent. She sits on the hospital board. Felt a connection unlike anything I've felt in decades. Forced myself to keep reading. Each page revealed more of my husband's secret double life and his growing bitterness toward me and our marriage. Told Christine my wife died 3 years ago of cancer. The lie came easily, more easily than it should have, And that disturbed me even more than the deceit itself. It was like he was describing a different life, one where possibilities still existed. Elena and I have been going through the motions for years. She doesn't see it, or chooses not to. Either way, when I'm with Christine, I feel alive again. As the entries went on, his justifications grew more elaborate, and his contempt for me became rawer. Elena asked about the Philadelphia conference today. Another lie. Spent the weekend with Christine in her Boston apartment instead. Deception had become second nature to him. Elena suspects nothing. She's too caught up in her book club and grandchildren to notice I'm gone. Sometimes I wonder if she'd even notice if I disappeared completely. The coldness in those words was staggering. This man had shared my bed, my meals, my life, all while secretly despising the quiet happiness I found in our retirement years, our grandchildren, our routines. Christine wants me to move in with her permanently. She keeps asking why I'm still living in that mausoleum to your dead wife. The irony was not lost on me. My so-called dead wife was very much alive, cooking dinner and asking about my day, if only she knew. About 3 months ago, the journal's entries took a darker turn. Looked into divorce today. The financial consequences are staggering. Half of everything we've built over 42 years would go to Elena. Pension split, house sold. At my age, starting over with those financial limits is unthinkable. There has to be another way. That other way began to emerge in the following entries. A plan so cold and calculated it was almost impossible to believe, conceived by someone I had once loved and trusted completely. Researched life insurance policies today. If Elena were to die unexpectedly, the financial situation would change drastically. As her husband, I'd inherit everything, plus the insurance payout. A clean break, a fresh start with Christine. Is it wrong that this feels more logical by the day? Page after page outlined the progression of his plan. Researching poisons, consulting a lawyer about inheritance laws, setting up a financial safety net, and planning the timing of my accidental death to avoid suspicion. Thallium seems ideal. Slow poisoning over weeks would mimic a natural illness. By the time anyone thought to test specifically for it, it would be too late. Cremation would destroy the evidence. Elena likes her coffee with cream, perfect for masking any subtle taste. We'll start with tiny doses next week. The final entry, dated the day before his return from a fabricated conference in Chicago, was perhaps the most chilling. Everything is in place, insurance policy active, final dose prepared. Elena's doctor's appointment perfectly timed. She'll report symptoms resembling early heart issues, no blood tests to raise alarms. Within days, it will be over. A grieving widower, free to start again, financially secure. Christine is already talking about summer travel plans. Just one last deception, one final act, and this double life ends. Elena would never understand what she had become, an obstacle to happiness, a financial liability, a reminder of decades of silent despair. This is better. Painless for her. Freedom for me. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. The man who had penned these words, the cold, calculating, merciless stranger, had kissed me goodbye every morning, attended our grandchildren's birthday, parties, brought me tea when I had a cold just weeks before. Had it all been an act? Had 42 years of marriage been nothing more than an elaborate lie culminating in this horrific betrayal? That night, I couldn't sleep. The journal's revelations replayed endlessly in my mind. By morning, I had made a decision. I would not let Roger's actions destroy me, neither physically by poison nor emotionally through betrayal. I called Detective Haraman. I'd like to speak with Christine Lauder, I said. There was a pause on the line. Mrs. Derrick, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Please, I need to understand everything, and I think she might need to understand, too. After some consideration, Haraman agreed to arrange a meeting on neutral ground, her office at the police station, with certain conditions. Apparently, Christine Lauder had agreed, as eager for answers as I was. 2 days later, I sat in a small conference room, waiting. When the door opened, I found myself face to face with the woman my husband had been willing to kill for. Christine Lauder was striking in person, tall, slender, with perfectly styled silver hair and elegant features that only grew more graceful with age. She wore a simple but evidently expensive navy dress, minimal jewelry, and an expression of utter devastation. "Mrs. Derrick," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I can't begin to tell you how sorry I am." "Please, call me Elena," I replied, motioning to the chair across from me. She sank into the seat, clearly fragile. "I want you to know, I had no idea Roger was married. None. He told me He said his wife died of cancer 3 years ago." Christine's voice cracked as she spoke, describing the treatments, the hospice care, every detail with painful clarity. I believed every word. I nodded, watching her closely. Detective Harriman had found no proof connecting Christine to Roger's scheme, and seeing her now, I believed she had been just as deceived as I was. Perhaps even more, since her entire relationship had been based on a fundamental lie. "I didn't come here to blame you," I said carefully. "I came because I need to understand what happened to my marriage, and I thought maybe you needed answers too." Tears welled in Christine's eyes. "How could he do this? To you, to me, to your family? What kind of person plans something so terrible?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," I admitted. "The man described in his journal, the man you knew, bears no resemblance to the husband I thought I had for 42 years. She looked puzzled at the word journal. I hesitated, then pushed the evidence bag containing Roger's journal across the table. "The police found this," I said quietly. "It spells everything out. His relationship with you, his growing bitterness toward me, and eventually, his plan to murder me rather than face a divorce." Christine stared at the journal as if it were a venomous snake, hesitant to touch it. "I don't know if I can bear to read it." "I understand," I said softly. I almost couldn't myself. But it answered questions I needed to hear. Was any of it real? What we had? Her vulnerability echoed my own internal struggle. "I don't know," I admitted, meeting her eyes. "I've been asking myself the same question, about 42 years of marriage." "What did he tell you about me? About his late wife?" Christine glanced away, clearly uncomfortable. "He said you were a high school English teacher, that you loved gardening and classic movies, that your marriage was happy but quiet routine." She hesitated. "By the end, he said you'd become, this sounds terrible, rather dull, stuck in your ways, uninterested in travel or new experiences." The casual cruelty stung sharply. "I see," I murmured. "He showed me pictures of your garden," Christine continued. "Said you built it together and caring for it was his way of honoring your memory." She let out a bitter laugh. God, how easily I believed it all. The grieving widower tending his dead wife's flowers, finally ready to love again. It sounds like something from a novel or a bad movie. I surprised myself by adding a touch of dark humor. "Yeah, a very bad movie." Christine gave a small, sad smile. We sat quietly for a moment, two women bound by the cruel actions of a man we had each loved in very different ways. "Did he ever mention our children?" I finally asked. "Our grandchildren?" Christine nodded. "He spoke of them often. Sarah and Michael, the grandchildren. Emma, Jack, and Lily. He seemed genuinely proud, showed me pictures." She paused, then said quietly, "That makes it worse somehow, doesn't it? That he could love them, be proud of them, while planning to destroy their family completely." "Yes, it does." "I don't understand it," Christine said, anguish clear in her voice. "If he wanted to be with me, why didn't he just ask for a divorce? I have my own money. He wouldn't have needed to." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. According to his journal, I said, he couldn't face the financial consequences. The division of assets, the pension split, selling the house at our age, starting over with fewer resources. I spread my hands. Apparently, killing me seemed like the more practical option. The harsh truth hung heavily between us. "I feel responsible," Christine said after a pause. "If I hadn't pursued him, if I hadn't pushed for something more permanent, No, I interrupted firmly. Whatever my husband became, whatever dark urges drove him to this, it wasn't your doing. He chose deception at every step, toward you, toward me, toward everyone. Those decisions were his alone. We talked for nearly 2 hours, piecing together fragments of our relationships with Roger, trying to build some kind of understanding from the ruins of his lies. By the time we parted, something resembling understanding had formed, not friendship, certainly, but a mutual recognition of shared victimhood and the long road of healing ahead. "What will you do now?" Christine asked as we prepared to leave. "Rebuild," I answered simply. "My life, my sense of safety, my relationships with my children and grandchildren. Roger stole many things from me, but he will not take my future." Christine nodded, a new determination shining in her eyes. "No, he won't take that from either of us." As we stepped out of the police station into the bright spring afternoon, I felt some of the weight lift, not the entire burden of betrayal and near death, but enough to glimpse a way forward. The man I had loved most of my life had tried to kill me. That truth would never change or lessen in its horror. But I had survived, not by chance or luck, but by my own instincts and actions. I had recognized the danger, collected evidence, devised a plan, and ultimately saved myself by refusing to drink from the poisoned cup. That terrible knowledge gave me strength. Roger had failed, and I would not. Summer arrived with an intense heat and humidity unusual for early June. I moved from Margaret and Harold's guest room into a small apartment near the community college where I had taught for 30 years before retiring. The familiar surroundings provided comfort as I worked through the complicated process of untangling my life from Roger's, legally, financially, and emotionally. The district attorney had offered Roger a plea deal, 25 years for attempted murder, with additional concurrent sentences for fraud and other charges. Given the overwhelming evidence, including his own journal and the poisoned coffee, his court-appointed lawyer strongly advised him to accept. But Roger, in what I now recognized as his typical arrogance, refused. He insisted on going to trial, apparently convinced he could convince a jury of reasonable doubt despite the mountain of proof against him. The trial was scheduled for September. In the meantime, I focused on rebuilding, meeting regularly with my attorney, financial advisor, and a therapist specializing in trauma and betrayal. My children visited often, their presence a steady source of comfort. The initial shock and disbelief slowly gave way to a fierce protectiveness that was both moving and, at times, overwhelming. "Mom, you should move to Portland," Sarah suggested, during one visit. "Be closer to us, to Emma. We have that mother-in-law suite that's just sitting empty." "Or Atlanta," Michael offered on his turn. "The boys would love having Grandma nearby." I appreciated their concern but knew I had to make my own choices, carve out my own path forward. "I'm not ready to leave yet," I told them gently. "This is still my community, my support network. But I promise I'll consider all options, once the trial is over." The trial hovered in my mind, both dreaded and anticipated. I would have to testify, face Roger across a courtroom, and speak aloud the details of his betrayal and my narrow escape from his deadly plan. A week before the trial was set to begin, Detective Haraman called with unexpected news. "Mrs. Derrick, Roger has changed his mind. He's accepting the plea deal." I sank onto the small sofa in my apartment. Why the sudden change? His attorney received the full evidence package, including testimony from the lab techs about the thallium levels in your coffee. Seeing the scientific proof in black and white finally convinced him that the defense had no chance. Relief washed over me. No trial, no public retelling of the most painful chapter of my life, no having to face Roger in court and see the face I'd loved for decades, now twisted with resentment and calculation. "What happens next?" I asked. "He'll appear before the judge next week for a formal plea and sentencing. You have the right to give a victim impact statement if you wish." Did I want to speak? To voice the devastation Roger caused? The trust he shattered? The life he nearly destroyed? I wasn't sure. "I'll think about it," I said. But as the date drew near, I realized more and more that I needed to speak, not for Roger's sake, but for my own. I needed to stand in that courtroom, look my would-be murderer in the eye, and reclaim my story from the distortions of his journal. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, warm despite the air conditioning battling the late summer heat. I sat in the front row, Margaret beside me, my children flanking us like guardians. Roger sat at the defense table, his shoulders slumped in a posture I'd never seen before, defeated, diminished. When he entered his guilty plea, his voice was barely audible. The judge asked him to speak up, to confirm he understood the charges and the sentence he was accepting. Roger complied, his gaze fixed on the table, never once meeting my eyes. Then it was my turn. I approached the podium, my prepared statement clutched in my hand. But as I faced the court, I set the paper aside. What I needed to say couldn't be scripted. "My name is Elena Derrick," I began, my voice steady. "For 42 years, I believed I was married to a man who loved me, who respected me, who would protect me from harm, not be the source of it." Roger looked up then, his expression unreadable. The man sitting at that table had planned my death in meticulous detail. He had researched poisons, constructed alibis, calculated financial gains, all while sharing meals with me, sleeping beside me, and attending family gatherings. This was no rash act driven by passion or madness, but a cold, deliberate plan stretched over months. I took a moment to steady myself before continuing. In his journal, my husband described me as an obstacle to his happiness, a financial liability, and a constant reminder of what he called decades of quiet despair. To him, ending my life was more convenient than divorcing me, more practical than having an honest conversation about the state of our marriage. Roger's eyes dropped, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I want this court to grasp the full extent of this betrayal," I said firmly. "This was not a crime of opportunity or impulse. It was calculated, researched, and practiced through small doses given over weeks. After 42 years of marriage, he decided my life had no value beyond the inconvenience it posed to his future plans." My voice stayed steady, powered by a righteous anger that had grown since I first uncovered the insurance policy. I recited every page of his journal, every detailed step of his plan to end me, every scornful dismissal of our shared life. Then, I looked directly at Roger, waiting until he reluctantly met my gaze. "You failed, not just in your attempt to kill me, but in understanding who I am. You wrote that I was oblivious, set in my ways, easily fooled. You were wrong. I noticed the insurance policy. I questioned your unexplained absences. I detected the metallic scent in the coffee you so carefully prepared. I saved my own life through the very traits you underestimated." Roger's face went pale. His eyes locked on mine with what seemed to be genuine shock. "The sentence you received today is just, but no prison term can fully account for the life you stole. Not through death, but through the destruction of 42 years of memories, now forever tainted by the truth of who you really are." I took a deep breath as I neared the end of my statement. "Despite everything, I stand here not as a victim, but as a survivor. You did not succeed in killing me, nor will you destroy my ability to find joy, trust, or a meaningful future. That is your final failure. I will rebuild. I will thrive. I will find happiness again." With that, I returned to my seat, legs trembling, but spirit unbroken. The judge thanked me and proceeded with the formal sentencing. 25 years as agreed, with no parole eligibility for at least 20. As Roger was led away in handcuffs, he glanced back briefly. For a moment, I caught something in his expression, perhaps remorse, or maybe just the grim realization that he had gravely underestimated me. Whatever it was the last time I would see the man I had married, the man who had shared my life and meticulously plotted my death. The courtroom door closed behind him, sealing that chapter, the longest and most defining one, in my life. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by my children, Margaret, Harold, and a few close friends who had come to support me, I lifted my face to the warm late summer sun. "Mom, are you okay?" Sarah asked, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." For the first time since finding that insurance policy hidden away 4 months earlier, I truly believed it. Now, years later, The rugged coastline of southern Maine stretched out before me in the crisp autumn light. I sat on the small deck of my rented cottage, a steaming mug of tea warming my hands against the October chill. Since Roger's sentencing, I had been piecing my life back together, slowly but steadily. The legal division of assets had been complicated, but fair, leaving me financially secure, if not wealthy. I had sold our family home, unable to face living there again, and used part of the proceeds to buy a modest condo in a community for active seniors. The rest I set aside for travel, experiences long postponed, and the education funds for my grandchildren. My relationship with Christine Lauder had changed in unexpected ways. Initially connected only by our shared experiences as victims, Christine and I slowly forged a tentative friendship rooted in mutual respect and understanding. She had moved to California to be near her daughter and grandchildren, but we kept in touch monthly, exchanging updates on our healing journeys. The psychological aftermath of Roger's betrayal proved to be the most difficult part of my recovery. Learning to trust again, not just others, but myself, was a slow and painstaking process. My therapist compared it to rehabilitating a broken limb: gradual strengthening, occasional setbacks, and relentless effort. Yet, despite the challenges, I had made meaningful progress. I had opened myself to new friendships, new adventures, and fresh perspectives on what the coming years might hold, including the possibility of new love. As if on cue, David appeared, in the doorway behind me, a gentle reminder that my tea was growing cold. His voice, tinged with the soft lilt of his Scottish heritage, broke the silence. "Just right," I smiled as he settled into the chair beside me. David Fraser had entered, my life 6 months prior, a retired history professor and widower who shared my passions for literature and hiking. Our relationship had blossomed slowly, both of us bearing the emotional scars of our pasts, his from grief, mine from betrayal. "A penny for your thoughts?" he asked, his weathered hand resting over mine on the deck railing. "Just reflecting," I replied. "Today marks 1 year since the sentencing." David nodded, understanding perfectly without needing further explanation. I had been transparent with him from the start, sharing the trauma that had shaped my recent life. "And how do you feel about this milestone?" he asked gently. I considered carefully. "Lighter," I finally said. "Like I've put down a weight I didn't even know I was still carrying." "That's good," he said, squeezing my hand softly. "You deserve that lightness, Selena. After everything, you deserve every moment of joy you find." We sat in peaceful silence, watching seagulls wheel against the darkening sky. In the hall distance, a lighthouse beam began its steady sweep, a beacon both of warning and hope. My phone chimed softly, a text from Sarah, with a new photo of Emma, now 4, smiling with a missing front tooth. I showed it to David, who smiled warmly. "You'll be flying out to see them next week?" "Yes, Thursday through Monday. Emma has a dance recital she's really excited about." Another quiet moment passed. What I cherished most about David was his ease with silence, his lack of need to fill every space with words. "I've been thinking," he said at last, turning to look at me, "about taking a trip this winter, somewhere warm, the Bahamas perhaps, or the southern coast of Spain." He asked carefully, respecting my independence and the healing still underway in my heart. "Would you consider joining me?" A year ago, such an invitation would have terrified me. Trusting another man, making myself vulnerable again, it had seemed impossible. But now, as the lighthouse beam traced its steady path, I found myself opening to possibilities instead of fears. "Think," I said slowly, "that Spain sounds wonderful. Sunshine and history in winter." David's smile was steady and sure, like the lighthouse's guiding light. "Excellent. We'll start planning when you get back from Portland." As dusk deepened into evening, we went inside to prepare dinner. Together, a simple fish chowder with crusty bread. The cozy kitchen smelled of herbs and spices, and cooking side by side felt both new and comforting. Later, sharing wine by the fireplace, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the shattering betrayal to the near poisoning, the trial's painful revelations, and the slow, careful process of rebuilding, every step had brought me here, to this quiet moment of contentment in a coastal cottage with a man who asked for nothing more than my company. Roger had failed utterly. He had not taken my life. He had not destroyed my capacity for joy. He had not even erased the possibility of love from my future. His final gift to me, ironically, was freedom. Freedom from a marriage that had been hollow for years. Freedom to discover my own strength. Freedom to imagine a life defined by my own terms. "More wine?" David offered, interrupting my thoughts. I smiled and lifted my glass. "Yes, please." As he poured, I made a silent toast. To the woman who noticed, an insurance policy hidden in a drawer, who smelled something metallic in her coffee, who trusted her instincts and saved her own life. To the woman who swapped cups and exposed a would-be murderer. To the woman I had become. If you enjoyed this story of survival and quiet triumph, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload from her true stories. Have you ever had a moment when something just didn't feel right, and your instinct saved you? Share your experiences in the comments below, and remember, sometimes the most important person to trust is yourself. Tag someone who needs to hear this powerful story of resilience.